Alright, my friends, this is the Lost Realm of Cardolan, part of Arnor, and setting for MERP, or Middle Earth Role-Playing Game System, produced by Iron Crown Enterprises. This would have been roughly September 1987, 2 years after I graduated from high school. So, Kingdom Cardolan encompasses all the lands between the rivers of Brandywine, Grey Flood, and Horwell. For a time, Cardolan stood at the forefront of resistance to the forces of the Witch King, mounting campaigns against its orcs, trolls, Easterlings. Those were the days of the Royal Army. Now only mercenaries and adventurers remain to block the advance of darkness. The conflict rages on, but it is a war of pillaging, burning crops, and inconclusive sieges. War with little honor and no glory. Explore Tharbad, the greatest surviving work of the Normarians, Londare, Alderon's ancient seaport, Barad Garethian, the mighty tower of the great houses of Cardolan. Now, the map we're looking at here is actually Arthedain to the north, and you have part of, here's Bree and part of the Shire. So the map we want is in the south to this section, and it's still attached to my book, so I have no intentions of pulling it out and sticking it out, and just leave it in the book the way it is, because it's a good thing to try to protect them. This is an ink stain, by the way. It's by no means something that belongs on the map. I can't remember. I'm gonna guess a leaky pen back in the day. I can't guarantee it. Don't know. My libation is A&W this morning, or late morning, however you want to look at it. So, my friends, one of the great things about Cardolan, about these source books, and I bring it up time and time again, is that there's so much added canon, beta canon, fluffed up based on actual locations. In the movies, I don't recall anything being said about Cardolan or this portion of Arnor or Tharbad. I know that in the books, Bromelier comments that he lost his horse crossing the river at Tharbad, and that there were one or other brief mentions of this. The most prominent would be the Barrow Downs, I suppose, because the Barrow Downs are part of the northeastern corner of Cardolan, and I suppose I could have got a clip of those off of YouTube to open this entry with. Now, didn't think about it, right? But the interesting part is that this is a very ancient and historic place in Eredor, and especially in the earliest days of Second Age. When Nurmur was at its height, the great forests that covered most of this section of Middle Earth were being lumbered and logged because the vast shipbuilding fleet, the ship fleets that Nurmur required a lot of hardwood and really tall trees, and that's where they got a big chunk of them. This is also the historical, Tharbad is the historical setting of the landing area where Nurmur's army landed and confronted Sauron in the Second Age and captured him, and led to their downfall in the end of the day. But the Great King at the time established a permanent settlement at Tharbad and built the Londare port. Right, it's just their term for it. And then later, quite a few Numerians had moved to Middle Earth to gain influence and to expand to settle, gain territory and land that they couldn't get at Nurmur on the island. And these are the basis of the foundation of many of the Numerians who supported Eredale. You know, the survivors of the downfall of Nurmur. As Isidore and his sons came here, and the 15 ships that brought them and their retainers and families away from Nurmur obviously didn't bring tens of thousands of Nurmurians with them. So the fact that they had quite a few already settled in Middle-earth in various areas was one of the reasons they chose Arnor and Gondor, was because it was already settled to some degree and developing. They just added a new layer of sophistication to them when they settled and claimed them as new kingdoms. This is the same backstory portions for Umber. That was settled by a bunch of Nurmurians who had a different idea on how they wanted to run things, and this is why they're called the Black Nurmurians now, is because they are not the good guys, or considered the good guys by the good guys. I'm sure the Black Nurmurians don't see themselves as the bad guys. It's kind of them politics things, right? So that's neither here nor there. But what we have here is a great missing piece of a large puzzle. At some point, Arnor was split into 3 smaller kingdoms, much to the detriment of everybody in the long run. So we got our guidelines, adapting our modules and definitions, and I've been considering one of these days I'm going to do a video that discusses this in more detail about how you can convert these systems over to running in your favorite fantasy setting, whether it's D&D or Pathfinder or Rollmaster or what have you. So we got our introduction. Even as the Third Age drew to close, me, the favorite tale spun and cozy into the Shire revolve around the old kings at Nolbury away to the north. Only those hobbits with the most particular interest in ancient lore, such as certain Bagginses, would recall there was once another Dunedain king no further away to the south. That yarn would have been laughed away, for in the wide lands between the Brandywine and the Grey Flood, there now lived only a few lonely men, outcast or crazed. Indeed, the Falahide brothers, Marshal and Blanco, fallen to the Shire in 1601. The kingdom of Cardolan, the land of Red Hills, had been an expression only found on old maps. All that now remained of the efforts of the accountants generations of men are the white-infested crypts of the Barrow Downs and the treacherous ruins of a great bridge at Tharbad. Even the wise had consigned Cardolan to the dusty and forgotten tomes. Only Tom Bombadil remembered, such as sheep were bleating in flocks, green walls, white walls rose, there were fortresses on the heights, kings of little kingdoms fought together, and the young sun shone like fire on the red metal of their new and greedy swords. There was a victory and there was defeat, and the towers fell, fortresses were burned, and flames went up into the sky. This is their tale, that of the Dunedain princes of the lost realm of Cardolan. So, it says, Cardolan comprises the lands, 2 great rivers of Eredor, between the 2 great rivers, the Brundon and the Guathil Mithil, extending out to I love these long, I just stumble all over them. Between the Brandywine and the Grey Flood, big chunk of property as far as the ocean. The center of this commerce was the great city of Tharbad. So, for those of you who are familiar with something called the Greenway, this is a road that was built in ancient times that runs south and north just to the west of Bree, and to the north it runs to the Deadman's Dyke, which was the settlement, quite large city for the northern Dunedain, and then it runs south. It goes down as far as Tharbad, where it crosses the Grey Flood, and it's quite wide, and the whole area is known for flooding in the springtime. So in ancient times there was a great dike that was built and a roadway built on top of it, and then this vast bridge that crossed the main part of the river, around which the city of Tharbad expanded. And its height, the book says somewhere about 25,000 residents in the city itself, and there were some 20 plus smaller towns and cities in Cardolan that owed allegiance of one form or another to the king at Tharbad, or the prince at Tharbad, depending on how you want to look at it. The main primary trade was wool and foodstuffs. There's a couple sections. Majority of Cardolan is not great, more grassland than anything else, but there's some areas that are very high producing farmland, and it was exploited quite extensively. When the forest had been forested, the ground turned out to be, it talks about it in here somewhere, not being the best of terrain for anything other than, so once the trees were stripped out, that pretty much ruined the ground for anything else. Goes on about a little bit of history, the history of Cardolan. See, it says here, the first person into the lands of Cardolan were the ancestors of the Befren, who came early in the first age. They fled to the coast when the ancestors, both the Dunedain and the Andorians, arrived in the middle years of the age, and the untutored and quarrelsome Northmen slowly built up relatively advanced forest society. Led by brash warrior kings, the little kingdoms at first profited from their distant cousins. The Numerian sailors, traders, and teachers who returned to the coast of Middle-earth. As Number gradually fell in the darkness, its inhabitants came increasingly for tribute and seized the woods needed for their fleets. There were increasingly bitter wars between the Erdorians and the Numerians that greatly contributed to the destruction of the pre-mortal forest that once covered all of Cardolan. The Numerians came as colonists as well as conquerors to begin construction of the havens of Londare and Tharbed before the wars, and a few venturesome persons settled permanently. Although more were most loyal to the faithful, only passed on their way to lands that would become Arthedain. Londare was often wrecked by great storms, so Tharbed became the chief city of the region. The original settlers prospered and grew, etc., etc. It talks about northwest Arnor. The northwestern Endor was considered dull backwater by the later Numerians, and the later faithful immigrants usually headed for more pleasant lands around Peleger. Thus, the colonists of Cardolan played little part in the conflicts between the king's men and the faithful Nermer and Suran, and Arphazon the Golden and the Valar. That is, until Eladel the Tall and his 4 storm-tossed ships filled with the remaining faithful Nermer arrived at the mouth of the Greywater. Third Age, the Kingdom of Cardolan. Yeah. The early Third Age gradually glad if it was a quiet time in Arna. The Dunedain of Cardolan gradually became resent their prince's lack of influence at court, which was dominated by the great families of the exiles, and consequently perceived a neglect of their interests. Still, except for tensions with the royal house itself, the realm was never in danger of collapse. The 10th king of Arnor had 3 sons, but loved best his second son, Eldakar. Eldakar was better known as Thorondor, or the Dark Eagle, for he was surprisingly mighty in mind and body, even by the standards of the Dunedain. Eredar would have passed the scepter to Thorondor, but his lords would not permit this. Thorondor was also a man of surpassing pride, who refused to accept overlordship of his elder brother, whom he regarded as a spastic jackass. Hey, their wording, not mine. Eredar finally decided to divide the realm on his death, and his third son, Alderon, was awarded the dubious honor of ruling the wildlands of eastern Arnor as the Kingdom of R'dor. So the Kingdom of Cardolan becomes, the territory becomes a kingdom, and begins a series of petty wars and conflicts between the 3 feuding kingdoms for control over key locations such as Weathertop and the roads and other strategic fortresses and things like this. Sometimes they banded together when an outside force, orcs and goblins and things like this, raided the land. Also, when the Witch King of Arnor establishes his kingdom, he starts to work to further separate these 3 kingdoms, drive wedges, originally taking over R'dor, and then constantly harassing and hassling Cardolan until it disintegrates. And it goes in and talks about those things. The fall of the kingdom. Second stroke of the Witch King began in 1408 with a series of probing raids that found the Dunedain better prepared. King Oscar and the army of Cardolan, which was comprised of largely infantry, was to play an anvil holding Almasol and the Barrel Downs, while the cavalry, Arthedain, and elves maneuvered in the plains to provide the hammer. Unfortunately, Witch King personally led the assault on Almasol. After its fall, the army of Cardolan, along with the king and his sons, was ground to dust. They attempted to retreat across the downs. Soon thereafter, most of the forces of the Witch King were now trapped against the Old Forest, and the remnant were pursued back into the gates of Mount Graham and Carn Dum. It would take the Witch King almost another half millennia to recover from this defeat, but Cardolan never rose again. Oster never learned nothing from the disaster at Cameth Bryn, for the death of his sons left only his young daughter, Nurendel, to take the crown. Nurendel was slain along with the able Chancellor Numhair in an abortive kidnapping attempt in 1412, only after 3 years of rule. Cardolan was again racked by civil war, but this time Gondor intervened after only 2 years. And this is Cardolan since the fall of the kingdom. For the most part, it becomes an abandoned land when we start getting into the age of the Lord of the Rings. It says, from 1645 to the fall of Arthedain, another half-century of a slow but inexorable decline. The few remaining Dunedain at Cardolan, even the doughty defenders of the sacred barrows, packed it in. They emigrated to Arthedain and Gondor in roughly equivalent numbers. The Gondorian garrison remained at Tharbad, but rotation of troops and commanders gradually ceased, so they became a hereditary warrior class in a decaying city. People of Saarland then continued to do reasonably well, but new settlements were made across the Guathel rather than east or north because of the increasing severity of the winters. Many common folk also drifted south, most often to swell the population of Dunland. In Third Age 1974, the Witch King launched his last stroke and ruined the kingdom of Arthedain, although the late coming revenge of the elves in Gondor utterly destroyed the realm of Agmar. Gondorian engineers remained in Eredor for some time, demolishing the remaining strongholds and ruins in the countryside so they would not become dens of evil. They withdrew in the Third Age 2052 and would not garrison the Tharbad was dissolved. So pretty much at that point it's just a ruin. There's a few often bandits and the occasional what have you that drift in and out of Tharbad or the ruins of Tharbad. And there's a mention somewhere that there was a major storm or something that knocked down the majority of the bridge. Actually removing the last of the physical ability to cross the Grey Flood without going as far north as the area around Rivendell. So we have a brief timeline of First Age, Second Age, Kings of the Realms in exile, Third Age, right here. 2912, unprecedented floods flung the fell winter, destroy the great bridges, and devastate Tharbad, which is abandoned. This had been the same year that in The Hobbit they make a mention of Warlord took, or the ice wolves or whatever that crossed, or the wolves that crossed over the frozen Brandywine, and I don't think that's the same. No, it's not Warlord took, but the wolves invasion and the halflings having to fight them off. It's about the same time. Since this here in 3018, Bromeri of Gondor loses his horse while fording the Guatho at the ruins of Tharbad. In 2019, the remnants of Surman's forces established themselves in Tharbad. And then the third year of the Fourth Age, forces the King Lester evict the bandits from Tharbad and reopen this old south road. And eventually, I assume that the ruins at Tharbad are either a city's reestablished there, because it makes for, it's my understanding, the Grey Flood up to the point of Tharbad is navigable by ocean-going ships, and that's one of the reasons that Tharbad was established where it was, because it makes a great port and transition point for both overland travel and for further travel up the rivers using smaller boats. So I imagine that once again at some point in the Fourth Age that would be something would be reestablished there. So we talk about the geography, origins, the rivers, the coasts, Cardolan's ecology, climate, flora and fauna, predators, wargs, giant eagles, spotted lions. Here's herbivores, deers, boars, rodents, birds and flying creatures, domestic animals. It says here, the men at Cardolan keep many beasts, but not a great variety of them. Most important of there is, of course, the sheep. There are two important breeds of sheep: common sheep and the hardo. A result, crossing wild goral with common sheep result is a lot less wool and less tasty mutton, but also the animal can survive unprotected in most areas of Cardolan. And then dogs, draft and transport, and horse and oxen, people and cultures. That's one of the other things about Cardolan is it has quite a range of cultures and settlers, because so many people have come and gone over this millennia through this region of Eredor that many have settled, and you have certain kinds of settlements in different times periods. So there's equivalent of clansmen, like the Scottish clansmen kind of thing, and the Dunedain, of course, and the middlemen, Northmen, Dunlanders, whatever. Dunedain of Cardolan. First Numerian sailors came to the lands of Cardolan in the 7th century of the Second Age, and their lords maintained a garrison at Londar and Tharbed intermittently for the next 1,000 years. The colony slowly expanded into the Greywater Basin. Despite vicious wars of native Eredorians, and Eladel the Tall, having escaped the downfall of Nurmur with the remaining faithful, arrived in Eredor. The Dunedain, the high men of the west of Cardolan, were quite pleased to be included within the new kingdom of Arnor. The early years of Arnor was very prosperous, despite the horrendous losses in the War of the Last Alliance of Men and Elves. This very prosperity led to slowly increasing tensions among the Dunedain of Arnor, as the southern lands were similar in their attitudes to their kin of Gondor. Materialism was mystically inclined northerners disapproved of. The parents and Eredorians are descended from first cousins of the Edain, ancestral Unedain and Dunedain, who did not migrate over the Blue Mountains into the Barlared in the older days. Without the Edain's extensive contact with the elves, the Eredorians remained far less advanced, though they had evolved a notable woodlands culture. Later they fell into the might of the Imperial Nurmur in a series of bitter wars during the Second Age. Their society, their appearance, the clansmen of Saralan. While most people of Cardolan have ancient roots, the clans of Saralan are a comparatively new phenomenon. After the downfall of the kingdom, many people sought the safety of thinly populated and less than appealing plains of Mithras with large numbers of common folk from central Cardolan, and many Eredorians arrived east with little clothes on their backs and joined the scattered tribesmen, etc. And then it says here, conflict would have been expected, but tireless efforts of the strange mage known as Tharkun, or otherwise, i.e. Gandalf the Grey, led to cooperation and integration. Then a century the new culture had blossomed, combining arts of tribesmen and vigilance of common folk, and the valor and individuality of the Northmen. Then you get your appearance, their society. Then we have the common folk, tribesmen. Latest in the long way of Dunlandings to enter Cardolan, their tribesmen have migrated north since the collapse of the mountain kingdom of the Dean Cointus. Other races, the Northmen, hobbits, Spaffin, wandering elves. The religion, politics and power, government. The Dunedain princes. 4 of the 7 traditional Dunedain princes still hold their ancient fiefs in Cardolan. Their titles date back to the Numerian times. They were renewed by Eladel, Thoronder, and Van Lindel. The princes of Guthan and Kenther maintain the ancient tradition that the title can only pass to male heir, etc. The Heredor, the barony of Guthan's traditionally encompassed the northern half, so the barons, a bunch of little baronies, a few other different types, like the Thanes, Kingdom of Sarlin, the Warlord's realm, which is a bag, some orcs that have gotten their stuff together. Tharbed itself. Although Tharbed lost all of its glitter and most of its pride, it is still a mighty city, at least by the standards of the north. The king of Cardolan once ruled Tharbed. It provided him a power base for control of his unruly princes. Few of the kings have a taste for living in Tharbed, keeping a royal compound at Tharlan. They administrated the city through the office of the mayor. There still is a mayor, but he serves only as a figurehead for ceremonial purposes or occasions. After the fall of the kingdom, Gondor took an ever-increasing role in Tharbad. Now administration of the city is in the hands of the Gondorian Cantor. Even the Cantor's effective powers are limited. The Warcraft, Cardolan's main formation were heavy infantry, which was their enemies called raggers, and the raggers, the infantry, took a perverse pride in attaching the tag in themselves. This professional pride of the raggers is legendary, and through insistent drilling to become the finest heavy infantry in Endor. At least it was not wise to suggest otherwise when a ragger was within earshot. Their most notable accomplishments were at the Battle of Daggerlad in 2nd Age 3434, when they held the flank against Sauron's Mumakil after the rout of the Sylvian Elves, and at the disaster at Cameth Bryn in 3rd Age 1217. There the raggers, although exhausted by a day of desperate fighting and taken unawares, rallied themselves and beat a path through the hordes of Gundabad. Cavalry and mounted infantry, militia, war bands of the tribes and clans, mercenaries, then mercenary companies. The Silver Age of mercenaries is said to have begun in 1459, when the remaining raggers besieged Terranfurt to the first Cantor in order to collect their back pay. The success of the rebellion led many of the professional warriors in Cardolan, of whom there were less than 1,000 left, to notice that for the prince to have only a force capable of doing it, raggers and some landless, they wanted it paid. Political situation, politics, the economy, the water road and the woolen trades, the old South Road. The institution, the guilds of Tharbad, which were quite affluent. The current guild politics, fairs and festivals. People of note, the Princes of Cardolan. This would have been roughly the age 1410, 1642, depending on how you're playing the game. And key individuals, Northern Cardolan, Southern Cardolan. Here's the town of Sudri. Here's the map. See, so you can see this map here, once unfolded, would go with this map here and extend further down. Here's the city. So here's the bridge over Tharbad that eventually disintegrates and falls in. The Barrow Downs, the other half of the Shire, because this map down here has the Shire located down here where my thumb's at. Tharbad. You can see how these maps originally were mounted in these books in the section, in the centerpieces, where this staples would be in some books. But like I said, this is one of the few I have that I didn't take out of the book for one reason or another. I can't remember exactly why that was. Tharbad itself, various chamberlains and guildmasters, captain of the Bargemen's Guild, etc., more NPCs, mercenary captains. Tharbad itself, the city plan, South Bank, North Bank, the island, Londare Innet. During the late summer and midwinter, when the waters of the Grey Flood are fairly clear, the sailors often can discern the regular stone foundations under the water nigh to the south bank of the mouth of the river. The old sauce among them will know that these are the ruins of the Londare Innet, or just Londare, the great middle haven, an ancient Numerian seaport that rivaled Peleger and Umber in the middle centuries of the Second Age. The moral of most of their yarns is that the overwhelming power of the seas, for as it can be seen that only this colossal rock remains as a reminder of the great efforts of the proud kings of old. The Vindelland, the first construction of Londare was began by Ardale Aldorian, the crown prince of Number, 3rd Age 777. He was a great friend of the elves of Linden, but their harbor at the Grey Heavens were hard-pressed to hold his mighty vessels, so he built his own. More information about that particular port. You can see the ruins as it would be when the water levels are down, and there's a few ruins that you can go and explore. There are ruins of Londour area map. So that's what these are basically. And then we have the Sidri and the towns. So here, during the height of the wool trade, Cardolan was the home of over 20 substantial towns that became less viable as the economy declined. However, the main problem was that the settlements provided an excellent target for many forces that ravaged the realm. There are now only 6 towns worthy of the name left, and all these have been sacked several times. Methrath, located on the junction of the Red Way and the Old North Road, i.e. the Greenway, near the center of Cardolan, is reasonably representative of the lot, and it gives it a, your typical breakdown. And here's a couple of the fortresses. Home of the Prince, the Argonne, is the home of the Prince of Dol Calantor. The Argonne is an ornate 3-storied hollow tower 40 miles from Tharbad. So, breakdown of the tower, and then another prince and his tower. Other sites, the old palace at Thelion. Kreb Durga is the ancient proto-Cimmeral site. This is basically an underground mixture of a ancient ceremonial site with some underground caverns that were taken over by the Warlord, who is this pretty intelligent orc and his flunkies. The treasury, the troll lair, of course, the Warlord's lair, and then we got some scattered adventures in here, and we're not going to really go into those because they don't matter. But that's Cardolan and Tharbad, so there are a lot of good stuff in here, and a lot of fill in the blanks, a lot of adventure ideas, and always worthy of a glance if you can get your hands on one of these things, and they're quite playable. They're still playable today with any system that we have current. That's me and my opinion on that.